The Power of Now. So this is a book, one of the greatest books, actually recommended by Michael Phelps, the world champion in swimming. So let's get started. I just read 30% this last night, and today I really want to give my first impression. There's a lot of concepts that I've learned that I think are quite interesting, and they actually deserve me talking about it. So welcome in episode number 14 in WhiTeeee podcast. The reason why it's called WhiTeeee is not because it's racist, but because it's just the name of the channel. So let's get started. So the first thing that it's really worth talking about in here is that, one, the book is recommended by Michael Phelps. Anything that's recommended by Michael Phelps is amazing. It's big, it's huge. I actually talked about it yesterday in the previous episodes, but nevertheless, well, I've just talked about the process of me actually getting to know the book and how I just watched like half of a video, just like few seconds. Michael Phelps said, there is this one book that I've read the dozens of times. It's called The Power of Now. And I just immediately stopped the video, went on Google or Safari, and I just downloaded the book, and now I'm reading it on Apple Books. Now, it's quite important to also understand that I quite respect Michael Phelps, and I think everybody does because he's one of the greats. He's definitely one of the greats in all sports, right? People put him with Michael Jordan, always say Michael Jordan, Michael Phelps, and you add someone else. So, let's stop gaslighting and just talking about Michael Phelps, as obviously he got all the medals in swimming, but I would say, let's just get started. The last thing I would say also about Michael Phelps is that he said in 5 years, he hasn't missed a single fucking day in training. He said every single day, and I would say, he said at least 100 of those, I really didn't want to even get out of bed. So that's quite interesting. So the first three things that I really want to talk about when it comes to this book: one, the first idea or first impression; two, the rule of separating me as a human or being and from my mind and emotions. That was kind of really interesting to sort of get to understand and discover while reading actually throughout the pages of the book. And also the third thing that I think I really want to talk about is the actual power of now and what do I think it actually means. So let's get started. I'll say as a first impression, I started reading the book. It looked like a normal book. It looked like a good book from like the 70s. That's what it looked like. And it's not in a good way, as if you have some sort of experience with books or knowledge, or you have read a couple of books, it looks like the book, I would say there is a lot of terminology that's very similar between this book, The Power of Now, and the book, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, which also was written in the 70s. Or Napoleon Hill died in the 70s, something like that. But the point is, that is actually, I would say, arguably, it's my number one recommendation book. It's an amazing book. I've just deleted it after like 1 year and 4 months of rereading it again and again. And a lot of terms that were quite similar, like talking about consciousness and unconsciousness, like the unconscious mind, the mind, emotion, fear. Also a lot of different emotions, most importantly fear. What did he talk about? Like negative emotions and positive emotions, like love, etc., which I will definitely explain later on in the points. Now I'd say like as a first impression, it was like, okay, but I at first I still didn't get like what's the point of the title of the book, which is The Power of Now. I really wanted him to just get to the point, start talking about like the power of now actually. But now looking back in retrospect, I think it's quite important that he actually made such a good introduction of the book, that he laid down so many terminology. And I would say the most important point, which is the point number 2 that I'll be talking about, that I've learned throughout this book, which is you should almost like dislocate or I don't know what's the word he said, but it's you separate between you as a being and your mind and your emotions. And almost you become as an observer, as a watcher, as he said, a watcher of the mind and emotions, instead of feeling like it's all you. So if you're feeling fear, instead of saying I'm afraid, you just observe the fear. And And also the first layer, or the first sentence that he said that sort of like struck with me, because I think it really is meaningful to me, is he started talking about the inner voice. So he said that everybody has an inner voice, and all of us know that all of those crazy people in the street that just talk to themselves out loud. And basically, all of us are just the same, just like all those crazy people. It's just that we don't say those things out loud, which is our inner voice. So now what he is talking is, he said, have you ever tried to stay for a little bit without the inner voice? Just with silence, shutting your mind. He said the problem with everybody, whatever, he said, all of us think that our mind is us, as if the more we use our mind, the better we get. But he said, actually, in this time, what you have to understand is that the mind is a tool that you have to use it. So the more you can leverage the actual mind, the better use you can come of it. So actually you can use it as a tool, which means you should turn it on and off. And he talks about the number one thing that people have a problem with is turning off their mind. Because what people think, he says, what people think is that they have control over their mind. And he says, he poses a question, can you actually stop the inner voice in your mind? Well, the answer is no. Then you don't control your mind, but your mind having a full control over you, because the mind is almost as if he's hungry. The mind just takes almost like the leverage or the euphoria in actually just thinking all the times, and he has some sort of craving or desire or addiction to think all the time and be thinking all the time, which he says, if you're thinking all the time, it means that your mind is having full control over you instead of the opposite that being true. So what you should do is actually stop and shut down your mind for a while and just observe the sound, and you will find out that it's really hard for you to shut down the inner voice, as he's always talking, he's always explaining, and a lot of the times it's a source of anxiety, negative, and fear. And he talks about even like if someone says, what if that voice is a voice of love and enthusiasm and positive energy, and then he says that is not actually your mind, that is not what we're talking to separate, but that is actually your true well-being, not well-being but your true being. And he talks about being as this state of you that is almost, you could say, like an origin. He sort of went through some definitions about God and whatnot. I really didn't get those, I didn't really comprehend those, but what I really understood is that the being is some sort of the pure version of you, the really who you are. As when he says you should actually disassociate yourself from your negative emotions, from your mind, from emotions, and become this observer, you become this watcher of all of this. He talks about being is you. So as you separate being from the mind and these emotions. So that was actually definitely quite interesting to comprehend and to sort of wrap my head around it, especially at the beginning. And he talked about how actually hard it is for us to make such thing happen, to make such thing a reality, as it's really hard to shut down your inner voice. And he says, what he says is, you have to get to the point where the voice in your head starts talking, and you just watch it. You just observe it. And he talks about how everything in life, and this is a strategy used by psychologists, is that everything or every emotions, the moment you start observing, the moment you start watching it, the moment you sort of put that pressure on it, it sort of dissolves and loses its power. Which I think is quite interesting of a topic. I would say point number 2, so it said for the first point I started with is the impression. The first point is that disassociating the mind and the emotion from the being. I'd say point number 2 that he really talked about is the power of now. And I think it's quite important. I'd say this is such an interesting of a topic, and I would identify myself as a book reader, although in the past year I was rereading a lot of the books. I didn't get involved in reading new books a lot. Like this year I've uploaded 20 books already in just the first month of the year. I have finished like a book 2 days ago. In this book, I'm already 30%. I might finish it today or tomorrow. So the point in here is that I'm a book reader and I go through a lot of topics, but it's so interesting how every time you read a book, it gives you such a new perspective that you're like, I've never thought of this. I never thought of it this way. And here when he talks about the power of now, he talks about the first notion that he explains is time. And he says the biggest problem that we have is we associate ourselves with the time. So the first step you should do is disassociate yourself from time. And I was like, well, that's kind of confusing. What do you mean? And he went on explaining how most of the thinking that we do is actually whether thinking about the past or planning in the future. So really, whatever it is that we're doing, we're always whether thinking of the past or thinking of the future. The past, we have all these traumas, we have all these hardships and experiences that we have, and traumas and maybe bad experiences that has happened to us, and all of these negative emotions and failures. And while the future is almost uncertainty, and he talks about there is two different versions of the future that people actually think about, whether it's positive, which means at least there is hope and people are hoping, and two, whether it's negative and people are thinking it's going to be worst, which is just a negative emotion. And he talks about all of both situations, which is the past and the future. Both of them are illusions, because when you think about it, past is just a now that has passed, and the future is a now that hasn't happened yet. So all of them is a now, and all of them are just illusion, except the actual now, which is the present. He also said like a quote, two-line quote that I really don't understand. Maybe you do. He said, I am not in the present. He said, like, you get to the point where you realize I am not in the present, but I am not in the present. And I just didn't get that. Maybe there's some sort of present and now and timing, but the point is, he also even indulged in explaining what do you mean, and he talks about a topic or a fact that I think that is the quite most important, and what really sort of sold me on this idea or convinced me with this idea. He said there is a lot of the times, and you can think, because basically while reading the book, it's sort of like you're trying to just think of the now instead of thinking of the past and the future. At least that's what I did while doing the future, while reading the book, and you can do that too now. But what I would say I personally did was sort of think of moments where I really felt present, that I was disassociated. I didn't think about the past and I didn't think about the future. And I think I can genuinely think of a certain period where it's almost felt such a positive emotion and love in that period, and it was about, I'll say about March 2021, and luckily that I've analyzed and I've did some research before on myself. That was actually the best version of myself in the past 5 years or so. And I said, well, I sort of got close to that version, but never quite close, like never quite to that level. And he goes on explaining how it goes on even explaining how a lot of people actually go and do hard situations, put themselves in danger. He said, have you ever been in an endangered situation where it's a life or death situation? And think about it. And while reading the book, I was thinking about when my mother has passed away. She passed away in my hands when she had cancer, and we had to fight, and all that period when it was a genuine life and death situation, when all of the mantra that was in my head, that if I'm not gonna do this, if I don't do the right thing, whatever, my mother's gonna pass away. So I was really genuinely talking about this, thinking while reading. And he talks about how every time you get in a situationship where you put yourself in a situation, where it's a life or death situation, what happens is that you become present in the future. All what you think about is the present. All what you think about is the now. And at that point, you don't care. You really pay no attention whatnot to the past or the future, because they're all illusions. You just don't care about it. And he said you don't even consider it being a problem. You don't even consider having problems, because he talks about how one of the arguments that you could give, you say, well, I have so many problems, I have to fix them, I have to think about them, I have to solve them. I can't just be living in the now, I can't just be living in the present and expect to solve them. I can't just sort of like look away from them and they're going to solve themselves. And he talks about you shouldn't actually look at them as problems, but instead you should look at it as a situation instead of a problem. And here when he explained, he said all of those situations, whether it's endangered situation, whether it's in genuine life in that situation, you never think of it as a problem, but instead you look at it as a situation. So you never look at it as a problem, you look at it as a situation. I think that was extremely important, extremely interesting. And I would say also the now, we also talked about how a lot of people actually go and try to replicate those situations, try to actively and purposefully actually replicate those emotions, replicate that part of them that they have to go, whether, it's like an adrenaline rush, whether they go climb mountains, whether they go running, whether they go do all of these dangerous sports and activities. And he talks about, but that is not the right way to do it, as that is just almost as if momentary, it's like just for a moment. Instead, it's not permanent. Instead, what you should actually do is that you should exist in that sort of mood or state, as he calls it, sort of this state of now, of all what you think is about now, permanently. So all the time, all what you're thinking about now. And while reading the book, I'm like, what Michael Phillips has said, that he has read dozens of times. Now, dozens of time means, if you don't know what dozens mean, at least 12. So we're talking about at least 12. And he says at least dozens of times. So we're talking about at least 12 times he read the book. And he's 5-time, 8-time, I don't know, 20-time world champion, I don't know. But we've all seen his picture with all of the medals. There was a third point that I really wanted to talk about that I have learned in the book, that I think it's quite important. So first, as I said, I talked about the impression, so my first impression. I talked about how you should disassociate yourself as a being from your mind and emotions. I talked about the power of now. And the three, I'll say like a takeaways that I personally thought of, an exercise that I did. So first of all, I would say it's such an interesting thing to sort of think in this perspective and have this scope in mind. It's not only that Michael Phillips has done it, but I've seen so many, I would say almost like creators or billionaires or writers or course makers or social media figures. They all try to explain this topic, but they never go this extreme to just talking about how you should live in the now permanently, forever, and all what you think about is now. And here's the problem. I would say all of the most high performers, I would say including myself, right? I would say including myself, we think about the past, we think about the future a lot. So in the past 2 months, which is insane, and that is the reason why I just love Michael Phillips. And here's the thing, I'm gonna just add this story. Every time I watch a Michael Phillips reel or a video that pops up on my Instagram or whatnot, every single time it leads to me taking action. Whether I go out for a run, whether I go out, but I don't swim, but I go out for a run, or I go to gym, or I go training, or I go boxing, I go shadow boxing, whatever. Every single time. And this is not something that happens with all of the, let's say, the athletes. Like Khabib Nurmagomedov drives me, but not instantly. With Michael Phillips, every time I hear him speak, he talks about the greats and whatnot, and like, I really want to be one of the greats. I consider myself at one of the greats, right? So he really drives me to sort of take that action immediately. And even in the past episode, the 13th episode of WhiTeeee podcast, I was really genuinely talking about how I really want to go take a 60-kilometer run. I ended up getting like a 10-kilometer run. But I talked, genuinely, I searched Michael Phillips on the search bar on Instagram. I saw a video. I almost couldn't even finish it because I was all burned and getting at it right now, which I think that is just like some sort of energy or some sort of aura, as you could say, but some sort of energy that he has that always dissolves to some sort of immediate now action. And I think it's so interesting to actually now being able to read the book and also look at the source that might be the source of Michael Phillips' source of having this now energy, just like getting in the power of now. So as I said, I've seen a lot of content creators and course creators and learners and teachers and gurus talk about the power of now. They always, I would say, a lot of them say, I don't give a fuck about yesterday, I don't give a fuck about tomorrow. The only day I see is today, right? And the only day that's coming is tomorrow. But the point is, here, it goes such an extreme that you're like, you shouldn't think about the past, you shouldn't think about tomorrow. And for the past 2 months, I would say, I was genuinely just thinking about the past and sort of analyzing the past year, 2025, just analyzing and getting into the intricacies of the details on why I've done this, why haven't I done this and that and this and that. And also trying to plan and sort of try to figure out the patterns in the past and what I have done right and what I have done wrong and how could I actually perform better a little bit and sort of see the patterns that I haven't seen and measure everything and also plan for 2026 and what are the right goals, what are the right systems to follow, am I right, am I wrong, am I this, am I that, and all the goals and experimenting and looking for results driven and action driven goals, etc. And that means I was living in the past and the future for the past at least 2 months of my life. I was never living in the actual present. The only time that I was living in present is when I go to, whether I go for a run like yesterday I did in the 13th podcast, like you go for a 10 kilometer run, 20 kilometer run, 40 kilometer run, depending on how much I can endure in that day, right? And some sort of these situations, I'll say even making some sort of videos that I do, especially for the Moroccan channel, where I go like I do challenge for 24 hours, where I have to just really be focused. I'll say all of these sort of help me exist in that now, some sort of aura or atmosphere. And funny enough, not funny, but interestingly enough, in the episode number 13 in the podcast, which was yesterday's, I filmed it yesterday, actually, I have written down what are the things that will make me hate myself. What will make me hate myself? And the philosophy behind it, as I explained in episode 11 or 12, I'm pretty sure 11, I explained how there is a feeling that I have gotten when my mother passed away, when my mother was passing away or was about to pass away, and when she has cancer and we were fighting and I was pushing myself, there was some sort of a feeling that almost it felt like I was drowning, and I was actually explaining as if I'm drowning, and and I said that feeling is what I really want to replicate, but this time for my business, for my dream, for my aspirations, for what I really want to get. And it's so interesting that I have put a list, and one of them was actually the 60 kilometer, which I ended up running and ended up finishing a 10 kilometer run. But the point is, I would say that feeling might just be what the author here and Michael Phillips refer to as the power of now. I'd say that was quite interesting. That was quite interesting of a book. I definitely read about about 30%. So 30% meaning it's almost like 250, something like that, or 300 pages. And do I recommend it? Yes. Will I make another podcast episode actually talking about it and going in details? Definitely. And please, I don't know if anyone's watching this, but please, if you're watching this, I have 350 subscribers. I uploaded 320 videos in the past 2.5 years, and I will never stop making videos. And my goal is to make about 10,000 videos this year, as also it's one of the reasons or one of the goals that I have figured out from the list that I wrote with you in episode number 13 yesterday, actually listing down all of the things that will make me hate myself. But now reading the book, we understand that maybe it's the things that will make me feel most in the present and live in the now more than the past, and not think about the past and future. So please subscribe so you support me.